Hi there, good afternoon. You're with BQ Prime, and this is the fine print. And we're coming to you with some breaking news on the Adani Group and Hindenburg Research PILs that were filed in the Supreme Court a couple of months ago. As you would remember, the Supreme Court had appointed an independent expert committee led by former Justice Sapre to look into some of the aspects that the PILs had raised. Among the many sort of issues that the committee was supposed to look at, some of the highlighted or the headline ones were to look at the market volatility in the Adani Group stocks around when the Hindenburg research report was made public. The committee was also supposed to look at whether there has been any regulatory failure on part of SEBI in investigating some of the aspects with relation to the Adani Group and the market activity. The committee was also asked to suggest measures to strengthen the regulatory framework and also comment on whether the existing regulations are sufficient to take care of investor interest. Now, in the background of this remit, the committee's report has now been made public on the direction of the Supreme Court. And among the many sort of observations in almost a 200-page report that the committee has made, the highlights include that the committee has said that the foreign portfolio investors invested in the Adani Group have made adequate disclosures as per SEBI's FPI regulations. And it has also noted that while the securities market regulator has suspected wrongdoing, but it has also found these FPIs in compliance with the existing regulations. The committee has also said that there is no pattern of artificial trading or wash trades in the Adani Group stocks around the Hindenburg research report when it was made public. They had was also asked to look at the allegations. The regulator was asked to look at the allegations on whether there has been certain price manipulation with regards to Adani Group stocks. It was also supposed to look at whether the group has complied with the minimum public shareholding norms prescribed by SEBI that requires at least a 75% threshold to be complied with by the promoters of the company. They had also asked to look at whether there have been short positions that were taken in the Adani Group stocks. Was there any foul play in them? The committee has said that with regards to related party transactions, MPS norms, and this price manipulation, SEBI's investigation is underway. So at this stage, it is difficult to return to a finding of regulatory failure. To understand what the committee's comments, observations, and conclusions mean, I'm joined by leading senior counsel, Amit Desai. Mr. Desai, welcome to BQ Prime. Your first quick thoughts, I know it's a 200-page report, Mr. Desai, but your first quick thoughts on what the committee has laid out and whether it has adequately answered the questions that the Apex Court had asked the committee to do so.
So first, thank you for having me here. And it's a 200-page report. So it's obviously, and it's a very, very complex report, needs a lot of read to digest all the nuances that are set out in the report. But if you ask me very, very broadly, because I've not obviously studied the report, which I've just received about 20 minutes ago, is that I think the first thing we have to compliment the committee that they have prepared a 200-page report and covered substantially about just about everything that the Supreme Court asked them to do within the span of 2 months that the Supreme Court directed. I think that's something which is something which we should respect and compliment these extremely busy individuals and independent persons who sat on this committee. Coming to the report itself and the issues that the Supreme Court had asked them to look into, I think the committee seems to have sort of dealt with it at two levels, broadly speaking. One is that they have looked at the question as to what are the measures that could be introduced to strengthen the investor awareness and any regulatory changes that have been there. And I think when you go through the 200-page report, in the context of strengthening investor awareness, they have been making some recommendations to the SEBI. Obviously, this might require a lot of internal deliberation and, if necessary, some kind of public consultation before those changes can be brought about, because regulations may have to be changed to bring about these suggestions. They've also recommended setting up of various bodies in the context of investor awareness, which will also make things a lot easier for investors whose shares are held up on account of debt, succession, etc., and try and actually speed up the process for investors. So there is a lot of very, very positive suggestions for the marketplace itself, which has come in. And to that extent, I think the remit that the Supreme Court had set out is to suggest measures to strengthen investor awareness. I think there's a fair amount that's there in this particular report. When you come to the question of the actual transactions, which were the subject matter of the Hindenburg report, I think there's a lot of detailed factual analysis that needs to be done. There's a factual analysis that's going on by the SEBI. And as I read from the media, the SEBI has asked for additional time to complete its analysis. But having said that, the committee has been has had the support of the regulators like SEBI, the Enforcement Directorate, and the Central Board of Direct Taxes to give them a sense of what the matter is about, an overview. And based on that limited overview and the information that they've placed before them, they seem to have come to some prima facie findings to suggest that there does not seem to be any significant contraventions of the regulation so far as the Adani Group is concerned. And naturally, they've taken into account, because one of the factors that the Supreme Court did ask them to look at is in the context of the volatility in the marketplace. And whilst they've looked at the volatility angle, they've also recognized that the Adani Group has taken many measures since then to calm the nerves of investors by raising a lot of additional capital and paring the debt so that the marketplace volatility is significantly brought under control. And they've also recognized that a lot more retail investors have started participating in the group shares itself. So I think overall, if you ask me, the committee has done its primary job of making recommendations on how to strengthen the processes and what is necessary in the interest of investors. And that there is a lot of, there are significant recommendations which have been made by the committee, which the SEBI needs to look at very carefully, the government needs to look at very carefully, and I think will go a long way in strengthening the marketplace from the investor's perspective. And naturally, obviously, the other issues, whilst they've come to some prima facie observations, the SEBI is looking into those matters because there are complex facts, there are investigations that are taking place outside of India. And as we all know, that a fact-gathering exercise of this type is not something that can be done within the time span of a few months. So I think all in all, I would say that a very significant part of the remit of the Supreme Court has been fully complied by this expert committee.
Okay, I'll admit that I'm yet to look at the detailed commentary of the committee on this, Mr. Desai, but I found it a little curious, this one sentence in the committee's report with respect to the foreign portfolio investor disclosures who are invested in the Adani stocks, that the regulator, while it suspects there is wrongdoing, but it has also found compliance with various regulations, FPI regulations. How do you connect the two, that why is the regulator then going and asking questions and we are still undecided on whether they're completely scot-free or not, if the existing regulations have been complied with? Do you feel or do you sense a disconsonance here?
Not really. I mean, you will see in many investigations, that particularly investigations of such a complex nature, that there is one declaration and then there is an assessment as to whether that declaration is entirely accurate or partially accurate or substantially accurate. Now, what the committee seems to have gone on the basis of the declaration as it is. And if you go by the declaration, there may be compliance. But the SEBI possibly could have told the committee that we are now trying to assess that whether the declarations are substantially correct, entirely correct, or partially correct. And if there is some area which is being looked at, then obviously the committee's views, when they caveat it, while on the one hand saying that the declaration is valid, but there is the possibility of some suspicion, is probably based upon what the SEBI would have told the committee, in which case I don't see any real discord between the observations of the committee in this regard. But there's no conclusion on this, and that's the reason why I think, if there is an element of suspicion, obviously the regulator will have to go into it, and that's not something that the committee can look at and make an assessment about it. So until all the facts are out, obviously, that's an issue on which there cannot be a final determination. But certainly a prima facie view could be taken, because that's one of the issues that the Supreme Court had requested the committee to look at. So I don't think there's any real disconnect between the two.
Okay, so even the committee has come back also with a similar sort of comment on with respect to related party transactions or price manipulations. They've said that, look, SEBI is supposed to investigate these matters and look into whether there is merit in allegations on both these aspects. And until that happens, we are not sure, or we can't say for sure that if there was a regulatory failure at all. Now, everybody. There was very sharp commentary, Mr. Desai, when Supreme Court had asked the committee to look at whether there was a regulatory failure on SEBI's part. Now the committee has come back and said, until SEBI completes its investigation on these aspects, it's difficult to say whether there was a regulatory finding. Do you see more work cut out for this committee once SEBI completes its investigation? Is that sort of a reasonable conclusion?
Well, I think, so far as the committee is concerned, I think the committee had a very limited remit. So far the regulator is concerned, the regulator is governed by the provisions of the statute and its regulations. And if any steps have to be taken, if the regulator, because they have the investigative powers, they have to make an assessment as to whether there's a contravention or there's no contravention. They're collecting all the data. That's entirely within the remit of the regulator, and the committee can really not go into those issues. So if, for example, there is a contravention, then it's for the SEBI to issue a show cause notice. If there is no contravention, then the SEBI, on a collection of all the evidence, will come to a conclusion there's no contravention and no show cause notice may issue. That's something which is not within the remit of the committee itself. Those are statutory functions, those are regulatory functions, and must be undertaken by the regulator itself. And therefore, in relation to those, I don't think that the committee would have any real role or responsibility in that context. And the only other question was that because of the nature of the allegations that were being made at the time, it was important for an independent body to satisfy itself that the regulator is functioning independently and is doing its job. And I think that's the sense that we're getting from this report, that the committee seems to be reasonably satisfied that the regulator is doing its job independently and uninfluenced from any areas. And therefore, if the regulator is doing its job, then I think that should not really mean that there's any other really role for the committee, unless, and the only other area where there could be a role is in the area of the recommendations that the committee is making. They could possibly be asked to, elaborate on those, articulate them more, flesh them out in some greater detail, etc. So that's something that if the committee itself feels the need to continue to function, because I believe the Supreme Court has enabled that by its last order, and that's something that the committee could continue to do if they feel that there's something more that they can contribute in those areas.
All right, Mr. Desai, we will of course come back to you for your more nuanced comments as all of us look at in the 200 pages in more degree of detail. Many thanks for joining us here on BQ Prime with your initial thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.